let's start with, if you could, the events of October 7th. What do you make of those events? And was the IDF actually tactically defeated, or was it allowed to happen?
Mike, it is, first off, let me say, especially in defense of all the families in Israel that lost loved ones as a result of what Hamas was able to achieve on October the 7th. It was the greatest tragedy in a one-day event in Israel's history ever. And that's what's galvanized the country. It's what's brought them together. Although I have some very serious concerns about the way this has been headed, nonetheless, it galvanized the country, brought them together. But at the same time, almost immediately, one of the first things that I noticed when this all happened was that 6 to 8 hour gap, Hamas, not to mention Hamas makes it in past the security fence in Israel totally undetected. Mike, I lived in Israel twice in my life. Back during the Intifada during 2004, I was in Israel constantly between 2004 2006. I have gone through a suicide bombing on September the 22nd, 2004. So I know firsthand how rapid the Israeli military, police, and ambulance services are in the wake of any kind of tragedy you could ever imagine. And during the Intifada, that was hands down. You always saw that. The military's response time is unbelievable. Not to mention the other thing that I began to look at when I was already getting information from Israelis that I know that live there. They were sending me information about, gosh, Steve, this is nuts. You know, we're talking anywhere from 6 to 8 hours, including I was getting information from former IDF members as well, for the military to respond. And I'm like, wait a minute, you know, last time I lived in Israel, I lived in Jerusalem. There's not any point in the country that you can't get to from Jerusalem that you're not there within anywhere from 2 to 2.5 hours, even a lot, all the way down to a lot, 2.5 hours. So what takes the military, especially with the military base right there, you know, we got little outpost military bases everywhere in Israel to begin with, and then the military suddenly can't respond. That began to become a real tragedy for me to even fathom. I mean, you know, it's one thing to know Hamas has made this attack, and we have the figures from Israel: approximately 1,400 people were killed, over 200 were taken hostages, and then nobody responds. I got one IDF guy that sent me a breakdown in it. He was actually assigned to the regiment that was overrun. They were practically all killed in their beds. And he spoke, and he wrote me a detailed description of things that he knew about. And in particular, Mike, one of the biggest ones that hit me was Sderot. Sderot is a little community. It's only like about a mile or so from the fence of the northern Gaza border. And that community there, he said that always it was protected by the military presence, always. And that's very common in Israel. When you're anywhere near, especially if you're in the West Bank or if you're along the Gaza border fence. I used to work at a kibbutzim, it's on the northern side of the Gaza border, so I understand this very well. But when you're there, the military has their forces there, and they're guarding all these little small communities. Well, suddenly, a few months before this operation happens, he explains that, actually, he doesn't explain this, another former IDF military commander said that they began to pull away, they pulled away the Israeli military presence, and they replaced them with a private security group. And then they decided to pull them away and have only the residents protect their own communities. And then on top of that, they pulled away, Mike, because every one of these communities have their own little armory there in the event something like this were to happen, to where the citizens have the ability to have heavier firepower, et cetera, to be able to get to it at the local armory of their community. Then the military goes in there and pulls all the armories out of all these settlements along the Gaza border.
Wow.
And then suddenly, then you top that off with reports coming out that 60 to 80% of the troops were removed from the Gaza border and taken to the West Bank for another possible scenario that they were dealing with. That's unheard of in Israel.
So all of these things point to, you believe, a deliberate stand down of sorts?
Well, Mike, I worked with the CIA back in the 80s. And of course, nothing related to the Middle East or anything like that. I was young. I did some pretty crazy things back then. But I left in 1991. And then later along the line, we had, some of the old colleagues that I had contacted me. We had talked about things that were going on in the Middle East. So I got more, especially with me being in the news here, independent media there, trying to bring out things that were happening around the world, Middle East, Russia, et cetera, through some of the contacts that I still had through the intelligence community. And one of those individuals contacted me. I reported it on my channel 11 months ago now. It's been 11 months ago now. I knew about it about a year ago. And he said to me, we were talking about the Russian-Ukrainian war, and I was asking him point blank, because we were already talking about, there was, according to the Joint Chiefs, there was a great concern based on the computer war game scenario that Russia may do a nuclear strike on Germany either at the end of this year or going into next year. That's just what the simulations show as a potential. I said, so I guess that's going to bring about World War III. He said, no. He said, what's going to bring about World War III is an event that's going to transpire in the Middle East. I said, what event's going to transpire in the Middle East? He said, I'm not at liberty to discuss that, but I can tell you, you're going to see an event transpire in the Middle East that is going to be so grave that when you do see it, you will know this is going to cause World War III.
And that became October 7th.
And yes, that became October 7th there. So, and that's the sad part of it. So I actually